Hello guys, welcome to my third video on commerce, finance and economics, crystal clear concepts. Hope you have seen my earlier two videos which were introductory in nature, and as committed I am now starting my series of snippets and videos concerning crystal clear concepts about topics in commerce, finance and economics. Today's topic is what is provision, what is reserve and the difference between provision and reserves, and what are the types of reserves. So, let us get started. Crystal clear concepts. Now, what is the difference between provision and reserves? In my earlier video, I have shown you what actually the meaning of provision is. Now, a term which is very commonly discussed with provision in finance and accounts is reserve, and many students in their initial period have got lots of confusion about both these terms. So, I thought it prudent to give you a crystal clear concept on provision, reserve, the types of reserve and the difference between provision and reserve. Now, what is the provision and reserve? Let us recapitulate. Provision means the money which has been set aside to cover any anticipated liability or loss, the amount of which cannot be determined with substantial accuracy. Now, that is important. The amount of which cannot be determined with substantial accuracy, while as reserves refers to withholding some amount for any use in future. Now, provision and reserve are two totally different terms and carry totally different meanings, which we will see and understand in the next slides. Please remember that provision is a charge against profit from that particular year in which it is provided for. Provision is a charge against profit in that particular year in which it is provided for, while as reserve is an appropriation of profit and is added to the reserve pool or to the specific reserve. So, क्या है दोस्तों, प्रॉफिट में अराइव करने के पहले प्रोविजन को चार्ज किया जाता है. दैट मीन्स द नेट प्रॉफिट इज अराइव्ड एट आफ्टर चार्जिंग प्रॉफिट इन द आफ्टर चार्जिंग प्रोविजन इन द प्रॉफिट एंड लॉस अकाउंट. वाइल एज रिजर्व कब आता है? नेट प्रॉफिट में अराइव करने के बाद जो अप्रोप्रिएशन होगा उसमें से रिजर्व क्रिएटेड होगा. सो रिजर्व इज एन अप्रोप्रिएशन फ्रॉम दैट ईयर्स प्रॉफिट एंड इज एडेड टू द रिजर्व पूल और टू द स्पेसिफिक reserve. While running a business, some expenses or losses may be apprehended relating to that particular year, but their exact amount is not known. Such expenses or liability or loss in assets is recognized by creating a provision as a charge against a profit. This is called provision. Likewise, a certain percentage or a certain amount is retained in the business as reserves. क्यों? To utilize them at any future point of time or to invest it in company's growth or to cover general future contingencies. This is called reserve. Reserves are actually the appropriations of profit. So, the basic difference between provision and reserve is that the net profit is calculated after giving the effect of all provisions, while as reserves are created only after finding the net profit and thereafter appropriating the net profit to reserve. प्रोविजन के एग्जाम्पल्स क्या है? प्रोविजन फॉर बैड डेब्ट्स, प्रोविजन फॉर डिप्रिसिएशन, provision for tax. रिजर्व का एग्जाम्पल क्या हो सकता है? रिजर्व जनरली दो टाइप का होता है, एक होता है रेवेन्यू रिजर्व, फॉर एग्जाम्पल जनरल रिजर्व, स्पेसिफिक रिजर्व, और एक होता है कैपिटल रिजर्व. दीज आर the two broad categories of reserves: revenue reserve, which is created out of the revenue profit, and capital reserve, which is created out of the capital profit, जिसके बारे में next slides में हम बताएंगे. There is one another nomenclature in the name of secret reserve. वो क्या होता है? Secret reserve is just a competitive strategy used by some companies. It is a reserve which generally does not appear in the balance sheet. Balance sheet में वो दिखता नहीं है, बट उसको हम लोग सीक्रेटली क्रिएट करके रखते हैं. क्यों करके रखते हैं? फॉर कॉम्पिटिटिव रीजन्स, टू हाइड फ्रॉम अदर बिजनेसेस और द कॉम्पिटिटर्स that it is in a better financial position than it appears in the financial statements, ताकि मेरे कंपटीटर को मेरा एक्चुअल रिजर्व का पोजीशन मालूम नहीं हो. तो इस कैटेगरी में हम लोग कैसे सीक्रेट रिजर्व क्रिएट कर सकते हैं? बाय ओवर स्टेटमेंट ऑफ लायबिलिटी और अंडर स्टेटमेंट ऑफ एसेट्स. प्रोविजन मीन्स keeping aside a sum of money to cover up an anticipated liability which arises from past events. It is a recognition of an expected obligation or loss which will result in the outflow of cash from the business. The amount of this provision to be created should be easily estimated so that it can be provided in the books of account. ठीक है? बट जो प्रोविजन हम लोग क्रिएट किए, अगर नेक्स्ट ईयर में जाकर हम लोग देख रहे हैं कि द प्रोविजन मेड इज इन एक्सेस ऑफ व्हाट इज एक्चुअली नीडेड, देन एक्चुअल पेमेंट ऑफ द लायबिलिटी करने के बाद जो बैलेंस लेफ्ट आउट रह जा रहा है प्रोविजन अकाउंट में, उसको हम लोग नेक्स्ट ईयर में प्रॉफिट के साथ ऐड बैक कर देंगे. दैट्स व्हाई इट इज सेड दैट इफ provision is made in excess of what is actually needed, then after actual payment of the liability, the balance left is to be added back to the profit and loss account. This recognition has to be made for a known liability or a decrease in the value of assets over time or a disputed claim whose probability of occurrence is maximum. Friends, आपको याद होगा, in my first video I had said the provision का journal entry in any case, either in case of increase of liability or in case of decrease in the value of assets, the concerned provision account is credited and the profit and loss account is debited. आपको याद होगा, याद है ना? That's why I am telling this recognition has to be made for a known liability or decrease in value of assets. Decrease in value of assets meaning, as I had told in my second video, sundry debtors less क्या? Sundry debtors less doubtful debts. तो वो एसेट से घट जाएगा और बैलेंस शीट का एसेट साइड में सन्ड्री डेटर्स से लेस करके आपको उसको प्रेजेंट करना है. इन द सेम वे, अगर लायबिलिटी बढ़ने के लिए, कोर्ट केस हारने के लिए अगर मेरा लायबिलिटी आ सकता है 1 लाख रुपया का, तो वो एडिशनल लायबिलिटी हम लोग लायबिलिटी साइड ऑफ बैलेंस शीट में शो करेंगे. ओके, नाउ लेट अस सी व्हाट आर द बेसिक डिफरेंसेस between provision and reserve. This is very, very important. We have on the different types of basis or different elements tried to explain the basic difference between provision and reserve. Provision का मतलब क्या है? Provision का मतलब है to provide for future expected liability और रिडक्शन इन एसेट. रिजर्व का मतलब क्या है? रिजर्व का मतलब है रिटेनिंग अ पार्ट ऑफ प्रॉफिट for future use as appropriation. Provision करने के लिए profit जरूरी है? Is the presence of profit necessary for creating provision? No, it is not necessary. Reserve के लिए? Yes. Reserve नहीं रहने से आप appropriation जो reserve आप करेंगे profit से, profit अगर नहीं रहेगा तो आप कहाँ से appropriation करोगे? So in most of the cases, in 99% of the cases, profit is required, the presence of profit is required for creation of reserve, except under some special cases, जिसके बारे में अभी हम लोग बात नहीं करेंगे. हम लोग बेसिक लेवल में डिफरेंस ऑफ प्रोविजन एंड रिजर्व को समझने का कोशिश कर रहे हैं. नाउ द प्रेजेंटेशन एस्पेक्ट. मैंने आपको बताया कि द प्रोविजन फॉर लायबिलिटी को हमको बैलेंस शीट के लायबिलिटी साइड में दिखाना है, एंड इन केस ऑफ लॉस इन एसेट एज अ डिडक्शन फ्रॉम द कंसर्न्ड एसेट एज अ डिडक्शन इन द एसेट साइड. रिजर्व को हमको कहाँ दिखाना है? रिजर्व इज टू बी शोन इन द लायबिलिटी साइड ऑफ द बैलेंस शीट. नाउ कंपल्शन. यस, creation of provision is a compulsion as per respective generally accepted accounting principles or GAAP. Now, is creation of reserve a compulsion? No, it's optional. It's optional most of the times, except जहाँ पर creation of reserve किसी statute के द्वारा किया गया हो या it is mandatory, जिसके बारे में भी हम बाद में डिस्कस करेंगे. Now about dividend distribution. Can provision be used for dividend distribution? No, provision cannot be used for dividend distribution. In case of reserve, yes, it can be used for dividend distribution. So दोस्तों, you get a very clear, a crystal clear concept about the difference between provision and reserve. Now we will discuss about the basic categorization of the types of reserve. First type is capital reserve. Now what is a capital reserve? A capital reserve means a part of profit. हम लोगों ने बताया है कि reserve is an appropriation of profit. अब ये appropriation कितने तरीके से हो सकता है? First is capital reserve. Capital reserve means the part of profit reserved by the company for a particular purpose, such as to finance long-term projects or to write off capital expenses. A capital reserve is an account in the equity section of the balance sheet जो capital profit के through से आया है, and that can be used for contingencies or to offset capital losses. It is derived from the accumulated capital surplus of a company created out of capital profit, that is not out of the normal operational profits of the company. Normal operational profits of the company से हम क्या बनाएंगे? हम revenue reserve बनाएंगे. But जो normal operational profits नहीं है, जो capital profit है, for example sale of any asset, वहाँ से जो reserve बनेगा उसको हम capital reserve कहेंगे. Okay? Examples of capital reserve क्या हो सकता है? Cash received by selling current assets, premium earned on the issue of share and debentures, excess on revaluation of assets and liabilities. Now दोस्तों, capital reserve के साथ एक term बहुत commonly हम लोग confuse कर देते हैं, that is reserve capital. ये reserve capital is a totally different thing. उसीलिए मैंने सोचा कि उसको यहाँ मेंशन करना ज़रूरी है. रिजर्व कैपिटल एक टोटली डिफरेंट कॉन्सेप्ट है. ये मेरा ऑथोराइज्ड कैपिटल जो मेरा होता है बैलेंस शीट में हम शो करते हैं, तो रिजर्व कैपिटल क्या है? वो कोई रिजर्व नहीं है. रिजर्व कैपिटल इज डिफाइंड एज अ पार्ट ऑफ द सब्सक्राइब्ड अनकॉल्ड कैपिटल which will not be called up until and unless the company goes into liquidation. In other words, it is the portion of share capital that is reserved by the company and which will be utilized only on the happening of the said event. So ध्यान में रखो, reserve capital और capital reserve same चीज नहीं है, totally different concept है. Okay? Now what is revenue reserve? As I had already told, a revenue reserve is created out of profits arising from the normal day-to-day business operations of the company, and revenue profit of the firm are the sources of revenue reserve. In the previous slide I have told you the capital profit of the firm are the sources of capital reserves. Based on the type of reserve, it can be utilized for any particular purpose only. Now, we can also categorize reserves in two broad categories, that is general reserve and specific reserve. General reserve क्या है दोस्तों? General reserve है that reserve whose purpose for creation is not mentioned in anywhere, as the management can use the reserve for any purpose. A general reserve is also called a free reserve. इसको हम किसी भी पर्पस के तहत यूज कर सकेंगे. लेकिन स्पेसिफिक रिजर्व क्या है, उसके लिए हम अलग फंड क्रिएट किए हैं विच कैन बी यूटिलाइज्ड फॉर द डेफिनिट पर्पस ओनली. जिस पर्पस के लिए उस रिजर्व को क्रिएट किया गया है हम उसके तहत ही उसको खर्च कर सकेंगे, दैट इज कॉल्ड स्पेसिफिक रिजर्व. सम एग्जांपल्स आर डिबेंचर रिडेम्पशन रिजर्व. हमको जब डिबेंचर रिडीम करना पड़ेगा उसके लिए हम एक रिजर्व क्रिएट करके रखे हैं फॉर अ स्पेसिफिक पर्पस ऑफ रिडेम्पशन ऑफ दोज डिबेंचर्स. वर्कमेंस कंपेंसेशन फंड रिजर्व, investment fluctuation fund, dividend equalization reserve, all these are types of specific reserve. So दोस्तों, we now come to the concluding slide of this presentation. What we see that creation of provision and reserves have their own separate and legal reasons. Liabilities must be recognized as and when they arise, and hence the requirement of provision. Provision का requirement क्यों आ रहा है? क्योंकि liabilities must be recognized as and when they arise on the basis of the matching principle. But reserves are created to keep or preserve some money for future needs, and so they are also to be created, but it is a management decision. Creation of reserve is voluntary, मैंडेटरी नहीं है, एक्सेप्ट इन केस ऑफ कैपिटल रिडेम्पशन रिजर्व और डिबेंचर रिडेम्पशन रिजर्व. सो फ्रेंड्स, आई थिंक नाउ यू हैव गॉट अ क्रिस्टल क्लियर कॉन्सेप्ट अबाउट द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ प्रोविजन, रिजर्व, टाइप्स ऑफ रिजर्व, कैपिटल रिजर्व, रेवेन्यू रिजर्व, and the basic difference between provision and reserve. Okay.